The text came in at 11:57 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was still sitting at my kitchen table in the dark, staring at a half-eaten grocery store cupcake my son had pushed away hours earlier. My army jacket was hanging over the back of the chair. My feet hurt, my head hurt worse. And my 8-year-old son was asleep in the next room after crying himself sick because a room full of grown adults had laughed when he asked for a slice of birthday cake. Then my phone lit up. My sister Melissa had sent a single message. Remember, some kids are born to lead, others are born to watch. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then another text came in. Maybe now your son understands where he belongs. That was the moment something inside me finally went cold. Not angry, not loud, just cold. Because Melissa thought she had humiliated a tired single mother at a family party. What she didn't understand was this. Women like me survive war zones. And once we stop loving you, there is absolutely nothing left to save you. I'm Captain Nora Whitaker, United States Army Intelligence Corps. I've spent most of my adult life inside secured buildings with no windows briefing men who wore stars on their shoulders and made decisions that never appeared on television. I've worked 18-hour days gone months without proper sleep and buried soldiers younger than my little sister's oldest child. But nothing ever hollowed me out quite like watching my son lower his eyes at his own great-grandfather's birthday party because grown adults decided he didn't deserve cake. The party was held at my parents' house in Fairfax County, Virginia, in one of those expensive neighborhoods where every lawn looked chemically perfect and every mailbox matched. My mother had spent 3 weeks preparing for Grandpa Walter's 80th birthday, catering, decorations, a jazz trio in the backyard, imported wine lined up beside crystal glasses nobody was actually allowed to touch. The whole thing looked less like a family gathering and more like a fundraiser for politicians. I almost didn't go. But Grandpa had called me himself 2 weeks earlier. "You coming, Nora?" he'd asked in that gravelly old Marine voice of his. "Yes, sir." "Don't sir me, just bring my great-grandson. The boy tells better stories than the rest of this family combined." That made me smile for the first time in days. So I went. My son Ethan wore a little navy button-down shirt and khaki pants that were slightly too short because he'd grown again. On the drive there, he practiced shaking hands because he took things seriously in a way that sometimes hurt my heart. "Do I call him Great-Grandpa Walter or just Grandpa?" he asked. "You can call him whatever feels right." "What if I mess up?" "You won't." He nodded thoughtfully from the back seat like he was preparing for a diplomatic summit. That's Ethan, sensitive, careful, the kind of child who notices when cashiers look tired. The kind of child my family never understood. The moment we arrived, I saw Melissa through the front window holding court beside the dining table like she owned the property. She was wearing cream-colored silk and enough diamonds to refinance a small country. Her husband Daniel stood nearby with a bourbon glass, laughing too loudly at everything she said. Their children ran through the house screaming while my mother chased after them, smiling like they were royalty. Then Ethan walked in quietly beside me, holding a gift bag with both hands. Nobody noticed him. Melissa noticed me, though. Her smile tightened immediately. "Well," she said loudly, looking me up and down, "look who finally escaped the Pentagon. I work at Fort Belvoir, Melissa." Same depressing government vibe. Daniel laughed. I smiled politely because years in uniform teach you that silence is often the sharpest weapon in the room. My father barely hugged me. He asked one question about gas prices before wandering off toward Melissa's husband. That was normal. In my parents' world, money counted as personality. Meanwhile, Grandpa Walter sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, wrapped in a navy cardigan, looking older than he had at Christmas. But the second Ethan approached him, his face softened. "There's my favorite Whitaker," Grandpa said. Ethan grinned. "You said that last year, too." "Because it's still true." For a while, things almost felt normal. Almost. Ethan sat beside Grandpa listening to old military stories while the rest of the family drank wine outside. I watched from the kitchen doorway holding a paper plate nobody had touched, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to think maybe we'd survive the evening peacefully. Then dessert came out. My mother carried in a 3-tier cake covered in white frosting flowers, imported from some famous bakery in D.C. Everyone gathered around taking pictures before Grandpa blew out the candles. The staff began slicing pieces carefully. But there weren't enough of the top-tier slices for everyone. Melissa immediately took 2 for her children. Daniel grabbed another. My mother set aside pieces for special guests. By the time Ethan quietly stepped forward, only a few slices remained. He looked at the cake, then at me. "Mom," he whispered, "could I try one?" I nodded. "Of course, sweetheart." Ethan smiled shyly toward the table. And that's when Melissa laughed. Not loudly. Worse. Softly. Like she genuinely found him pathetic. "Oh, honey," she said, tilting her head, "those pieces are really only for kids with a future." The room went still. I actually thought I'd misheard her. Ethan froze beside me. Daniel snorted into his drink. One of my cousins muttered Jesus, but nobody corrected her. Nobody. Then my mother gave that uncomfortable little smile she used whenever Melissa crossed a line, but happened to be entertaining while doing it. "Well," she said weakly, "Melissa's just joking." But she wasn't. And everybody knew it. Melissa shrugged casually. "I'm just saying some children are actually going places." Then she looked directly at me. "You can't spoil every kid equally." A few people laughed. I looked at my son. That's the part I'll never forget. Not the insult. Not the silence. Him. His shoulders folded inward so slightly most people wouldn't notice. His little hand loosened around the paper napkin he was holding. He stared at the floor, trying to act like he didn't care. Children always try to protect themselves quietly first. That nearly killed me. Grandpa Walter opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but before he could, I stepped forward calmly and picked up both our plates. My voice came out perfectly steady. "Come on, sweetheart." Ethan looked up at me immediately. "Okay, Mom." No tears. No scene. That somehow made it worse for everybody watching. We walked through the house while conversations awkwardly restarted behind us. Nobody stopped us. Nobody apologized. As I reached the front door, Grandpa called my name softly. "Nora." I turned. He looked devastated. But he still hadn't said anything when it mattered. I gave him a small nod anyway. Then Ethan and I left. The drive home was silent except for the windshield wipers. Rain had started falling halfway down Route 50, blurring the lights into long streaks across the glass. About 20 minutes into the drive, Ethan finally spoke. "Mom?" "Yes." What did Aunt Melissa mean? My throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I kept my eyes on the road. She was wrong. But why did everybody laugh? That question hurt worse. I pulled into a gas station parking lot because suddenly I couldn't see clearly anymore. Ethan sat quietly in the back seat, waiting for an answer he deserved, but shouldn't have needed. I turned around slowly. "Listen to me," I said. "Some people think money decides who matters. They're wrong. Your future isn't decided by people sitting around a birthday cake." He looked down at his hands. "Okay. But children remember humiliation differently than adults. Adults replay words. Children replay feelings." And I knew this night would stay with him for years. When we got home, I warmed up leftover macaroni and cut a cupcake in half from the grocery store near our apartment. Ethan took 2 bites and said he wasn't hungry anymore. An hour later, he fell asleep with the bedroom lamp still on. Then came the texts, and by midnight, sitting alone in that dark kitchen, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was done. I barely slept that night. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up pretending and walked into the kitchen wearing old army sweatpants and one of Ethan's elementary school fundraiser t-shirts. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of tires hissing across wet pavement outside. Melissa's text still sat glowing on my phone screen. "Maybe your son should learn early not to expect things he didn't earn." I must have reread that message 20 times before finally placing the phone face down on the counter. Not because it hurt. Because it explained everything. People always think cruelty arrives as screaming or violence. But in families like mine, cruelty wore pearls. It smiled during holidays. It brought expensive wine and asked polite questions before quietly deciding which child deserved love and which one didn't. And somehow my sister had become very good at it. By 6 a.m., I was already making coffee when Ethan wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. His hair stuck up in 6 different directions. "You're awake early," I said gently. "So are you." "Fair point." He climbed onto the stool beside the counter while I slid pancakes onto a plate. For a few minutes, neither of us mentioned the party. That was another thing Ethan had inherited from me. When something hurt deeply enough, we both became quieter instead of louder. Finally, he asked, "Can I still make Grandpa a birthday card?" The question nearly broke me. "Of course you can." He nodded and started eating while I watched the early morning light creep across our tiny apartment kitchen. The place wasn't impressive. 2 bedrooms, old cabinets, heating system that rattled every winter. But it was clean, safe, peaceful. Everything my childhood home never truly was. I grew up less than 40 minutes from where I live now, but emotionally it may as well have been another country. Melissa and I were only 3 years apart, yet my parents treated us like we belonged to entirely different bloodlines. Melissa was the golden child from the beginning. Beautiful, charismatic, the kind of girl teachers described as sparkling. She learned early that charm could erase consequences. By high school, she had perfected the art of smiling while destroying people. Meanwhile, I was serious, quiet, too blunt for my mother's liking. "You always look angry," she used to tell me. I'm thinking, well, stop. Men don't like women who look intimidating. I was 14 the first time I realized my mother genuinely believed a woman's greatest achievement was being admired in a room. Melissa understood that game instinctively. I never did. By 17, she was dating wealthy college boys and practicing signatures with imagined married last names, while I spent afternoons at the local recruiting office asking questions about military intelligence programs. My father almost laughed himself sick when I announced I was joining the Army. "The Army," he repeated. "Nora's smart girls become lawyers or doctors. I want to serve." "You want to run away," Melissa corrected from across the dinner table. She said it lightly, but there was satisfaction underneath it. Because she already understood something I hadn't yet fully accepted. In our family, leaving was treated like betrayal, and independence in a woman was viewed almost as an insult. The night before basic training, my mother stood in my bedroom doorway watching me fold clothes into a duffel bag. "You know," she said carefully, "your sister has options. Men notice girls like her. You don't have to do something this extreme just to feel important." I still remember the silence after that sentence. I wanted her to take it back. She never did. So I left. And for the first time in my life, I breathed properly. The Army didn't care whether I smiled enough. It didn't care about designer handbags or country club memberships or whether men found me charming at dinner parties. It cared whether I could think under pressure, whether I could lead, whether people trusted me when things went bad. Turns out I was very good at those things. By 32, I was an intelligence officer with multiple commendations and overseas deployments most civilians would never hear about. Men twice my age listened when I spoke during briefings. I learned how to stay calm while everyone else panicked. Melissa hated that. Not openly at first. At first, she pretended my career was adorable. "Oh my God," she'd say at parties, laughing with her wine glass in hand, "Nora does all that secret spy stuff." Like I was playing dress-up instead of serving my country. Then came my marriage. His name was David Mercer, Air Force logistics officer, smart, funny, patient in ways I didn't yet understand I would desperately need. For a while we were good together. Then deployments happened. Stress happened. Distance happened. And somewhere along the way we stopped speaking the same emotional language. But what finally destroyed us wasn't war. It was exhaustion. The year Ethan turned 4, David looked at me across our kitchen table one night and said quietly, "I don't think we know how to be married anymore." And the worst part? I think both of us already knew he was right. The divorce itself wasn't ugly, just sad. 2 tired people slowly surrendering. Melissa, however, treated it like confirmation of a lifelong theory. "I mean," she said once while pretending sympathy military women usually struggle with relationships, "men don't like competing with masculine energy." Masculine energy. I'd spent 16 months overseas analyzing threats for men who trusted me with lives, but according to my sister, my real failure was not making a husband feel emotionally taller. After the divorce, Ethan and I moved into the apartment near Fort Belvoir. Smaller life, smaller budget, simpler routines. But honestly, we were happier there than I had ever been growing up. Our Friday nights involved frozen pizza and old movies under blankets. Ethan liked helping me polish boots before inspections. Sometimes he saluted me dramatically while carrying cereal bowls to the sink. "You are relieved of kitchen duty, Captain Mom." I'd laugh every single time. That child carried more kindness in his little finger than most adults I knew, which is why what happened at Grandpa's birthday hurt so much. Not because Melissa insulted me, because she aimed it at him. Late that afternoon, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. "Grandpa." For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered, "Hi, Grandpa." A long silence followed. Then he sighed heavily. I should have stopped her. I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. "Yes," I said quietly, "you should have." Another silence. "I'm sorry, Nora." Hearing that nearly undid me more than the actual insult. Because Grandpa Walter rarely apologized for anything. I kept thinking somebody else would say something he admitted. But nobody did. Number. I stared across the apartment toward Ethan's bedroom where soft music drifted through the cracked door. Then Grandpa's voice lowered. "You know what bothered me most?" "What?" The boy still said thank you before he left. My eyes closed instantly. Of course he had. That's who Ethan was. Grandpa cleared his throat roughly. "You raised him right." Emotion climbed into my chest so suddenly I couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, I whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for him." "You are," Grandpa said immediately. "You're the only one in this family who understands what matters." I almost cried then. Almost. But years in uniform teach you how to swallow emotion before it reaches your face. After we hung up, I stood by the window watching evening settle over the parking lot outside. Families moved through ordinary routines under yellow streetlights. Somewhere nearby, somebody was grilling dinner. I could smell charcoal drifting through the open crack in the kitchen window. And for the first time since the party, I allowed myself to admit something dangerous. I didn't want reconciliation anymore. I wanted distance. Real distance. Because there comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes loyalty to family can become a form of self-destruction. At 11:43 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Melissa." I stared at the screen before opening the message. Maybe your kid can learn early not to expect things he didn't earn. That time I didn't cry. I didn't even feel shocked. I simply looked toward my son's closed bedroom door and felt something inside me harden into steel. Then very softly I whispered into the dark apartment. "You picked the wrong mother to humiliate." The call came at 5:12 the next morning. Most people panic when their phone rings before sunrise. Military people don't. We just sit up immediately and prepare for bad news. I grabbed the phone before it could wake Ethan. The screen displayed a secured government number I recognized instantly. Whitaker. "Captain, this is Colonel Reeves. I apologize for the hour." Which meant whatever this was mattered. "I'm awake, sir." "That's unfortunate," he said dryly. "Means you're already ahead of half the Pentagon." Despite everything weighing on me, I almost smiled. Colonel Martin Reeves had supervised me on and off for 6 years. Sharp mind, brutal standards. One of the few senior officers who never cared whether I was likable as long as I was competent. "Nora," he said more seriously, "I need you in DC by 8. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. That happened whenever life became dangerous or important. While other people spiraled emotionally, my brain became cleaner, quieter. "What's going on, sir?" "Can't discuss over unsecured lines." "Understood." Then he paused. "And congratulations." The line disconnected. I stood motionless in my dark kitchen holding the phone while the refrigerator hummed behind me. Congratulations. That word stayed with me the entire drive into Washington. By 8 o'clock, I was walking through a secured corridor inside the Pentagon wearing dress uniform blues and carrying enough classified clearance to make civilian conversations feel surreal sometimes. The building smelled exactly the way it always did, old coffee-polished floors, recycled air, and exhaustion. Colonel Reeves waited inside a conference room with 2 men I recognized immediately from previous intelligence briefings. One civilian. One general. That was never casual. "Nora," Reeves said, standing. "Sit down." The civilian slid a folder across the table. Inside was my transfer package. But not just a transfer. A promotion track. A leadership appointment inside a cyber defense initiative so classified most of Congress barely understood it existed. For a moment I genuinely thought there had been some mistake. The general studied me carefully. "Your operational assessments overseas ranked among the highest we've seen in years, Captain Whitaker, especially under pressure." I kept my face neutral. Inside my heartbeat had turned thunderous. The civilian leaned forward. "We need officers who are difficult to intimidate." That almost made me laugh considering the previous 48 hours of my life. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. New responsibilities, expanded authority, security briefings, non-disclosure agreements thick enough to stop bullets. By the end of it, my career had quietly shifted onto an entirely different trajectory. Nobody in my family would ever understand the significance of that room. To them, success only counted if it came with a yacht or appeared on Instagram. The irony was almost funny. Because while Melissa spent years performing wealth, I had been building actual security. Not just through the army. Through work nobody in my family even knew existed. 3 years earlier, after noticing serious vulnerabilities in civilian infrastructure systems during overseas operations, I began consulting privately for defense contractors during approved off-duty periods. Risk analysis, cybersecurity protocols, infrastructure resilience. Boring words for very expensive problems. The company stayed intentionally small, quiet, efficient. And profitable. Very profitable. Not flashy money profitable. Real money profitable. Enough that Ethan's college education was already secured. Enough that I could leave the military tomorrow and never panic financially again. Enough that I no longer checked grocery prices before placing things in my cart. But I never discussed any of it publicly. Partly because confidentiality mattered. Mostly because I'd spent my entire life learning something important. People who desperately need others to see their success are usually terrified underneath. Melissa posted photographs of handbags. I built contingency plans. After the Pentagon meeting ended, I stepped outside into cold February air and finally checked my personal phone. 3 missed calls from my mother. 1 voicemail. I already knew the tone before listening. "Nora," my mother said tightly, "your sister feels terrible about what happened. I think perhaps you overreacted by leaving so abruptly." I actually stopped walking. Overreacted. Not Melissa humiliating a child publicly. Not a room full of adults saying nothing. Me leaving quietly. That was apparently the problem. I deleted the voicemail halfway through. Then another notification appeared. An email from the Fairfax Advanced Science Academy. For a second I frowned in confusion before opening it. Halfway through the first paragraph I sat down hard on a concrete bench outside the Pentagon. Ethan had been accepted. Not just accepted. Selected for a military-sponsored STEM enrichment initiative with fewer than 30 openings statewide. I read the email twice just to make sure exhaustion wasn't scrambling my vision. My son. The little boy Melissa had dismissed as futureless over birthday cake. He'd just earned admission into one of the most competitive academic programs in Virginia. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not loud. Not joyful exactly. More like disbelief mixed with vindication. I immediately called Ethan's school. When the secretary brought him to the office phone, his voice sounded nervous. "Mom." "Hey, sweetheart. Is everything okay?" I swallowed emotion carefully. Better than okay. A pause. Then softly, "What happened?" "You remember that science program you applied for?" Silence. Then a tiny intake of breath. "I didn't get in." "Yes," I said, smiling despite myself. "You did." For 3 full seconds he said absolutely nothing. Then I heard him whisper, "Really? Really?" His voice cracked on the next sentence. "Mom?" That one word carried so much hope it physically hurt. "You earned this, Ethan." "Can I tell Grandpa?" The question caught me off guard. After everything, he still wanted to share joy instead of resentment. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think Grandpa would love that." That evening, Grandpa called before I had the chance. I heard my great-grandson is officially smarter than the rest of us. Ethan grinned so hard I thought his face might split open. After he ran off to finish homework, Grandpa's tone changed. "I need to ask you something." "Okay. Did Melissa contact you again?" I hesitated. "Too long." "That bad, huh?" She's being Melissa. Grandpa exhaled slowly. You know, she wasn't always like this. I leaned back against the kitchen counter. Yes, she was. Silence. Then quietly, maybe you're right. That admission sounded painful for him. For the first time in my life, I think Grandpa was beginning to see the family clearly instead of nostalgically. Then he said something strange. I made some changes recently. What kind of changes? My will. I straightened immediately. Grandpa, don't start. I'm 80 years old. I know how wills work. That's not what I meant. I know exactly what you meant, he said gently. And no, this isn't punishment. It's clarity. I didn't respond because suddenly I had a very uncomfortable feeling about where this conversation was heading. Grandpa lowered his voice. Melissa thinks character can be measured by appearances, but I watched your boy thank people who humiliated him. That told me everything I needed to know. My chest tightened painfully. Grandpa? I won't be around forever, Nora. Don't say that. It's true anyway. Then after a pause, you became the strongest person in this family because nobody ever protected you, but that little boy deserves different. I looked toward Ethan sitting at our tiny kitchen table doing homework with complete concentration, tongue pressed slightly against his cheek, the way he always did when solving math problems. And suddenly I understood exactly what Grandpa meant. That night, Melissa posted photographs online from the birthday party. Perfect lighting. Perfect smiles. Perfect wealthy family. The caption read, "Nothing matters more than family." Thousands of people probably believed it. Meanwhile, less than 24 hours after humiliating my son publicly, her husband had quietly emailed one of my consulting contacts, asking whether I was available for a private security review involving financial exposure. Interesting. Very interesting. I stared at the message for a long moment before setting my phone down slowly. Then I smiled for the first time in days. Because Melissa had spent her entire life underestimating me. And people who underestimate quiet women usually don't realize their mistake until it's far too late. Grandpa Walter died on a Tuesday morning in October. Peacefully, they said. As if there were anything peaceful about losing the last person in a family who still remembered how to love without conditions. I got the call while reviewing intelligence reports inside a secured office in Arlington. One of my analysts was speaking when my phone vibrated against the conference table. The moment I saw my mother's name, something inside me already knew. I stepped into the hallway before answering. He's gone, my mother whispered. For a second, I couldn't hear anything except the distant hum of fluorescent lights overhead. When? About 20 minutes ago. I leaned against the wall slowly. My grandfather had survived Korea, cancer twice, heart surgery, 3 decades of marriage to a woman he adored before losing her too early. He'd always felt indestructible to me in the stubborn way old soldiers sometimes do. And now he was simply gone. The funeral took place 4 days later beneath a gray Virginia sky heavy with cold rain. Military honors had been arranged quietly at Grandpa's request. Most of the extended family seemed surprised by that. I wasn't. Grandpa never spoke much about Korea, but I once caught him standing alone in his garage staring at an old folded flag for nearly 20 minutes without moving. Some wars never completely release people. Ethan stood beside me outside the chapel wearing a black suit and tiny dark tie that kept sliding crooked no matter how many times I fixed it. He looked older lately. Not sad exactly. More observant. Children become observant after humiliation. Melissa arrived 10 minutes late in a black designer dress with enormous sunglasses and the expression of someone attending an important networking event instead of a funeral. Daniel walked beside her, looking noticeably thinner than the last time I'd seen him. Interesting again. My mother immediately rushed toward Melissa while barely acknowledging me. There she is, she breathed emotionally, hugging her golden child first. I almost smiled at the predictability. Then Melissa noticed my uniform. Dress blues. Rows of ribbons. Officer insignia. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Well, she said lightly somebody came prepared for a photo opportunity. I looked at her calmly. It's a military funeral. Yes, but you do enjoy dramatic entrances. Before I could answer, a voice behind us said sharply, Captain Whitaker? Melissa turned. Two senior officers approached across the wet pavement, one of them a brigadier general I had briefed 3 months earlier during a cybersecurity coordination meeting. The general extended his hand immediately. "My condolences about your grandfather." "Thank you, sir." He glanced toward Ethan. "And this must be the future engineer I've heard about." Ethan straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir." The general smiled. "Your mother speaks highly of you." Melissa's face changed almost imperceptibly. Confusion first, then calculation. Because suddenly she was realizing something uncomfortable. Important people treated me like I mattered. More officers arrived during the next 20 minutes. Respectful handshakes, quiet conversations, recognition Melissa clearly hadn't expected. I watched her trying to piece together the version of my life she had apparently never bothered imagining. To her, I had always remained the awkward younger sister who left home because she lacked better options. Not a woman trusted with national security briefings. Not someone powerful men listened to carefully. The service itself was beautiful in the restrained way military funerals often are. No unnecessary theatrics, just dignity. When the folded flag was handed to me instead of my mother, the room shifted subtly. Melissa noticed. Everybody did. Grandpa had requested it personally in writing. I saw my mother blink in surprise as the officer knelt before me. On behalf of a grateful nation. My throat tightened instantly. Beside me, Ethan reached quietly for my hand. After the burial, the family gathered at my parents' house for the will reading. Rain hammered softly against the windows, while relatives filled the living room balancing coffee cups and grief that already felt partly performative. Melissa sat closest to the attorney with the confidence of someone expecting confirmation rather than uncertainty. Daniel looked exhausted. The attorney Harold Bennett adjusted his glasses and opened the folder slowly. "As you all know," he began, "Walter Whitaker updated his estate documents 7 months ago." Melissa smiled faintly. Of course she did. Everyone assumed the house would go to her. Maybe additional investments too. Melissa had spent years acting like inheritance was simply delayed recognition of superiority. Then Mr. Bennett continued reading. And the room changed. The primary trust and majority estate holdings, he said carefully, will transfer into an educational and financial trust for Ethan Whitaker. Silence. Complete silence. I actually thought I'd misunderstood. Melissa stared blankly. "I'm sorry," she said, finally laughing once in disbelief. "For who?" The attorney looked up. "For Nora Whitaker's son." The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. My mother looked horrified. Daniel slowly lowered his eyes into his lap like a man watching disaster arrive exactly on schedule. Melissa's voice sharpened. "That has to be temporary language." "It is not. There's no way my grandfather left everything to a child." Mr. Bennett remained perfectly calm. "Not everything. Certain personal distributions remain allocated individually. However, the home investment accounts and primary assets have been placed into trust ownership benefiting Ethan Whitaker." Ethan, sitting quietly beside me on the couch, looked utterly confused. "Mom," he whispered, "what's happening?" I squeezed his hand gently. "It's okay." Melissa stood abruptly. "No, actually it's not okay." Her face had gone pale beneath expensive makeup. "This is manipulation." "Nobody manipulated Walter," the attorney replied evenly. "Oh, please, Nora's been sneaking around visiting him for months." I finally spoke. "He called me after you humiliated my son." The room froze again. Melissa laughed sharply. "Oh my God, are we seriously still doing this? It was a joke." "A joke?" I asked quietly. "Yes. You told an 8-year-old he didn't deserve cake because he had no future." "It wasn't literal." "No," I said, "it was worse." Melissa opened her mouth again, but Mr. Bennett interrupted. "There's more." He removed a small flash drive from the folder. "Walter specifically requested this recording be played if the estate distribution caused dispute." Melissa scoffed dramatically. "This is insane." But nobody stopped the attorney as he connected the drive to the television. A moment later, Grandpa appeared on screen seated in his favorite leather chair wearing the navy cardigan he always loved. He looked tired, but very clear-eyed. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I'm dead, and Melissa is probably angry." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. Grandpa continued calmly. I spent most of my life believing blood automatically made people family. I was wrong. Melissa's expression tightened. Then Grandpa said the sentence nobody in that room would ever forget. The night I watched my great-grandson denied birthday cake while grown adults laughed, I realized kindness had skipped an entire generation of this family. Absolute silence swallowed the room. My mother started crying softly. Melissa looked stunned. Grandpa looked directly into the camera. Ethan thanked people before leaving that house after being humiliated. That told me more about his character than 20 years of polished appearances ever told me about the rest of you. Melissa suddenly exploded. This is unbelievable. But Grandpa's recorded voice continued over her. Nora spent her life protecting people, while this family treated her like a disappointment because she didn't marry wealth. Meanwhile, the only person raising a decent child was the daughter you all underestimated. Daniel closed his eyes. I think that was the exact moment his marriage finally died. Then Grandpa finished quietly. If you're angry about my decision, ask yourselves why an old man trusted a little boy more than his own adult family. The screen went black. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Melissa stood trembling in the center of the room while years of carefully maintained superiority collapsed around her piece by piece. And for the first time in my entire life, my sister looked small. 3 months after the funeral, Melissa's life began falling apart publicly. Not all at once. Lives like hers rarely collapse dramatically in a single moment. They crack slowly beneath the weight of appearances people can no longer afford to maintain. First came the whispers. Then the rumors. Then Daniel quietly moved out of their house. I heard about the separation from my mother during a short, painfully awkward phone call one Sunday afternoon. She's under a lot of stress, my mother said carefully. I stood in my kitchen stirring soup while Ethan worked on homework nearby. I imagine she is. You don't sound surprised. Because I wasn't. Men like Daniel usually tolerate cruelty only while the outside world keeps rewarding it. Once financial pressure entered the picture, Melissa's constant need for control probably became unbearable. The truth finally surfaced 2 weeks later. Daniel's investment firm had been under federal investigation for months before Grandpa's birthday party. Nothing criminal on his part personally, but enough financial exposure to destroy the illusion of effortless wealth they'd spent years displaying online. The expensive vacations slowed. The charity gala photographs disappeared. So did many of the friends who used to crowd around Melissa at parties. Funny how quickly admiration evaporates when the champagne stops flowing. Meanwhile, Ethan thrived. That was the part Melissa never could have predicted. Because people like her assume humiliation permanently weakens children. Sometimes it does the opposite. The STEM Academy transformed him within months. He became more confident, more curious. He started building little robotics projects across our apartment until wires and tiny tools covered half the dining table. One evening I came home from work to find him wearing safety goggles while dismantling an old toaster. Should I be concerned, I asked. Probably a little, he admitted. I laughed harder than I had in years. Life settled into something peaceful after that. Not perfect. Just honest. I spent my days balancing Pentagon responsibilities with motherhood and consulting work. Ethan spent his evenings telling me about coding competitions while stealing pieces of garlic bread directly from the pan before dinner. Sometimes we still talked about Grandpa, especially on quiet nights. He really believed in me, Ethan said once softly while helping me wash dishes. He absolutely did. Why? The question caught me off guard. Because he saw who you are. Ethan considered that carefully. I think he saw who you are too. I had to turn toward the sink for a second after that so he wouldn't notice my eyes watering. Children say things plainly that adults spend years avoiding. By December, the trust paperwork was finalized. I made sure every dollar remained structured exactly as Grandpa intended. Education, security, stability, not luxury. That distinction mattered deeply to me. Because Grandpa hadn't left Ethan wealth as a reward for superiority. He left it as protection from becoming the kind of person our family had become. Melissa attempted contacting me twice during those months. I ignored both calls. Then, one snowy evening in late January, my mother appeared unexpectedly at my apartment, carrying a store-bought pie, and exhaustion carved deep into her face. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller, too. Mothers who build their identities around one child's perfection often struggle terribly when that illusion collapses. "She's not doing well," my mother admitted quietly after sitting down at my kitchen table. I poured coffee without answering. "She says everybody abandoned her." The irony almost hurt. Finally, I asked, "Did she ever apologize to Ethan?" My mother looked down immediately. Number. There it was. The real problem. Not pride. Not inheritance. Not money. Melissa still didn't believe she had done anything wrong. My mother wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I think she's angry that your life turned out stable." I almost smiled. Stable. Not glamorous. Not impressive. Not envied. Stable. After all these years, maybe my mother was finally beginning to understand the difference between peace and performance. Before leaving, she hesitated near the door. "You know," she said softly, "your grandfather used to say you were the strongest person in the family." I looked at her quietly. "He said that because nobody ever protected me." For a moment, genuine shame crossed her face. Then she left. That night, snow covered the parking lot outside our apartment in soft white silence. Ethan and I stayed home wearing socks and oversized sweatshirts while chocolate cake cooled on the counter. Real cake this time. Extra frosting. His academy had awarded him first place in a regional engineering competition earlier that afternoon, and he'd chosen chocolate cake to celebrate. I watched him grinning while trying to light candles himself. "You're tilting them," I warned. "I'm creating artistic tension." "You're creating a fire hazard." He laughed. God, that sound healed things in me. After dinner, we sat together on the couch eating oversized slices while an old movie played quietly in the background. Then Ethan asked the question I think he'd been carrying for months. "Do you think Aunt Melissa still hates us?" I set my plate down slowly. Hate is complicated. She acted like I was bad. "No," I said gently. "She acted like money decides who matters." "And it doesn't?" I looked at my son carefully. "No, sweetheart, character does." He nodded thoughtfully. Then after a pause, "I felt embarrassed that day." My chest tightened instantly. "I know. But now I kind of feel sorry for her." That nearly stopped my breathing for a second. Not because it surprised me. Because it sounded exactly like Grandpa. Around 11:50 p.m. after Ethan went to bed, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened the message. "Melissa, remember when you walked out carrying those plates?" I stared at the screen while snow drifted softly outside the window. For a long moment, I considered saying nothing. Then I thought about Ethan blowing out birthday candles an hour earlier with chocolate frosting on his nose and joy shining openly across his face. I thought about the little boy who once lowered his eyes in shame over a slice of cake, and I realized something important. My revenge had never been destroying Melissa. Life had handled that part already. My revenge was raising a child so deeply loved that her cruelty failed to poison him. So I typed one final message. Yes, but now he's the child with the brightest future in this family. I stared at the words for a moment. Then I blocked her number permanently. Outside, snow continued falling over the quiet Virginia night, while the apartment smelled faintly of chocolate cake and coffee. Ethan slept peacefully down the hall, dreaming about robots and science competitions, and futures nobody would ever deny him again. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely free. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. Have you ever had to walk away from people who underestimated you or your children? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day, stories about family resilience, heartbreak, and quiet strength. So if you enjoy emotional journeys like this one, subscribe and stay with us for the next story.